Okay. Hopefully everybody got a little notification that we are recording this session. We will start the Pollinator webinar in just one moment. I would like to start with a short introduction of the Ontario Living Lab program. Just want to make sure that you can see my screen here. There we go. The Living Lab Ontario program is a 5-year project that brings together organizations, producers, scientists, and other experts to co-develop, test, and evaluate beneficial management practice that address climate change and challenges in agriculture. Sorry, I will continue going here. There are currently 54 Living Lab projects happening across Ontario. And you can see our map here with the different types of projects that we have going on. And the Pollinator project is one of these as well. Okay, there are 3 core principles of the Living Lab. We focus on farmers' needs as the people who ultimately use these innovations. Farmers are the key collaborators throughout the entire process. They not only test the proposed innovations, they contribute knowledge and experience to their development and improvement at every stage. And we have a broad diversity of partnerships, and I will just show you that after this screen. We have farmers, multidisciplinary teams of scientists and researchers, and other collaborators who contribute their expertise and resources to develop innovative farming practices and technologies. These collaborators include Indigenous groups, governmental institutions, industry representatives, nonprofit organizations, and producer groups. And we test in real life context. The practices and technologies are tested in the context and scale in which they are adopted on local farms under real agricultural production conditions. And here are some of our partners and funders. This program was launched in 2021 under the Agricultural Climate Solutions Canada. It's a $185 million Canadian-wide program that will allow Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada to build and strengthen a nationwide network of agricultural living labs over 10 years. And the Ontario Soil and Crop Association lead the delivery of this program in partnership with more than 15 agricultural organizations across the project. Okay, well, thank you for listening to my presentation. And now we will get to the Pollinator workshop. I will stop sharing my screen and I will introduce our speakers. Our first speaker is Tracy Etwell. She is a terrestrial ecologist at the Canadian Wildlife Federation. Her background is in plant and fire ecology. She has surveyed, monitored, and restored native plants in many habitats throughout Canada. After Tracy gives her presentation, we will hear from Gil Miranda, who is an entomologist originally from Brazil. After getting his PhD from the University of Guelph, Gil worked in the Brazilian Amazon as a researcher and conservation officer. Now calling Canada his home, he is researching along with the Canadian Wildlife Federation, looking at the impacts of different human practices on pollinator populations in Eastern Ontario. And we will encourage everybody, we'll get started right away, encourage everybody to pop into the chat, tell us where you're from. And if you have any questions, I will help facilitate those, and please put them in the Q&A box. Okay, Tracy, are you ready to share your screen, please?
Jill is going to go first, actually.
Oh, okay, sorry. Jill, go ahead.
Thank you, Kelly. Just sharing my screen. Oh, hope everyone is able to see it. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for having me here. My name is Joe Miranda, as Kelly introduced. I'm an entomologist, currently working as a postdoc in the forest lab at the University of Ottawa, but I collaborate often with the Canadian Wildlife Federation, and I'll talk a little bit about the actual bugs, the insects that we call pollinators. So one thing that we'd like to start is talking about pollination. Some might already understand it, just for the sake of clarity, I'm just gonna cover it. So pollination is it's the way that plants use to reproduce. The pollen is taken from one flower to another one, from the masculine part of one flower to the feminine part of the other flower. And this way seeds and fruits are produced. There are other ways that plants can do that. One of them is through wind. It's a common way for some groups. And then the pollen to reach the appropriate part on the other flower will require random chance of being carried by the wind and reaching that other part. But during the evolution of plants and organisms, one of the other more effective ways that developed was having this pollen being carried by a vector, by another organism, pollinators. So several groups can be pollinators, among them birds and mammals, but insects are the most abundant and most efficient in doing this process. And I know bees are one of the first thing that comes to mind, but we also have flies, butterflies, moths, beetles, you name it. There's other different insects that are carrying out pollination. So just look at this bumblebee on the flower. They just really get into it. The pollen gets everywhere, and that really helps on the pollination of plants as they carry on this pollen to other plants. But just as a reminder, not all bee is a honeybee or a bumblebee. So we have several different groups of bees that are able to carry that on. And Canada has several different organisms that do that, as I mentioned before, but bees and flower flies, which I'll talk a little bit later, are the most common ones present there. So in Canada, we have around 868 bee species, and just in Ontario, 455 species. And the bees collect this pollen to actually feed their larvae. They go from flower to flower, make a little packet, a little ball of pollen, put it in a nest cell, place an egg there, close it, and then afterwards the little bee larvae, which you can see from the picture here, will live in there eating the pollen until it develops and becomes a full-fledged adult bee with wings and all. So the bees have special structures on their bodies that help them collect this pollen, usually around the legs. So they have special hairs there that make a little basket where it's easier for them to pack the pollen in there. And they also use the nectar for the adults to power their flights. That's how they get their energy and part of their liquids to move around. So through this practice of collecting the pollen for their larvae, they also help the plants pollinate, because not all the pollen gets carried away. Some of them will land on the parts of the flower that the plant needs. This way completing pollination. So not only on the legs, but certain groups of bees, their special hairs for carrying pollen is actually in other parts of the body. In this example here in particular, this group of bees, the leafcutter ants, the pollen is actually carried under their bum here on the back part of the bee. So not always on the legs. Oops. So as I mentioned before, not only bees are able to do this, we have a very important group of flies that actually carry out this practice. I don't know if you thought that this was a bee as you saw this slide. I know that artificial intelligence in PowerPoint thought that this image was actually a bee on a flower. In Canada, we have around 550 species of flower flies, and just in Ontario, 317 species. And this is just one family of flies. The flower flies, they go for the flowers actually to feed, they feed themselves, the adults, on the pollen and the nectar there, so they don't take it to their young. which is very interesting because the larvae of the flower flies, they actually have several different habitats where they occur and different habits from the adult. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later in the presentation. And it's a cool thing, as I already mentioned, and you saw, they're very similar to bees in general, but not only bees, we have a lot of species that are also similar to wasps. And if you can check here on this image and see, you can see the efficiency of pollen carrying from these flower flies. Even though they're not collecting it, they get all messed up with the pollen, and so it's carried on their legs and other parts of their bodies. And in this way, when they go to another flower, they help carrying the pollen to complete pollination. So here's just an example, another species of flower flies, still a fly, not a wasp, but they have this astounding mimicry to the similarity to wasps and bees. The theory is that this helps these flies avoid predation, avoid being eaten by other organisms because the flower flies are very harmless. They don't have stingers, they don't bite, and that would make them an easy prey for predators. But since they look like bees and wasps, that sometimes will keep these predators from attacking them just for being afraid of being stung. Very efficient. So I wanted to talk a little bit about generalists and specialist pollinators. So when we talk about a generalist pollinator let's think it's like a varied diet. So this bee or flower fly will visit several different species of plants to collect their pollen and feed on the nectar. So just like the common eastern bumblebee here depicted on these pictures, there's several different species that they can visit to be able to gather the pollen and get their nectar. While a specialist, you can think of someone with a very restrictive diet. So they're very specific species of plants that they can visit, and they won't visit other ones. Just an example here, we have the yellow loosestrife bee that needs to visit the specific flowers of the yellow loosestrife, on the purple one, to be able to collect some special oils that helps them create their nests where their larvae are gonna live in. So they can't just have like any kind of flower or plant there to be able to survive. They have very specific species that they need to visit. Another one is the evening primrose bee, which not only is a specialist, but the flower also depends a lot on the bee. The pollen on these flowers, on the evening primrose, they have a special sticky substance to the pollen that a lot of bees cannot collect it. But this species in particular, her hairs, as I said, those special structures on the legs that help collect pollen, they're different from other bees, and only them are able to efficiently collect the pollen from these flowers, use it for themselves, and also help the flower do carry on pollination. Talking about bees in particular, we hear about social bees and solitary bees as well. So not all bees have a colony per se, with a queen and workers. So this will vary. We know the example of the common honeybee that are a very good example of social. They have a queen that will lay eggs, and the workers that will carry on collecting pollen and nectar to be able to feed the larvae that the queen bee is placing. So the queen, which is laying the eggs, has help from other bees. While the solitary bees, the one bee that's laying the eggs does all the work. So they will go after pollen, eat nectar for themselves, and build the nest by its own, providing each cell with the little ball of pollen, putting an egg there, closing it, and then going out and doing the process again. As an example, here we have the striped sweat bees that are, most of the species are commonly solitary bees. A little bit about seasonal and daily activity, talking about these organisms. Bees, the different species of bees, they don't occur nonstop throughout the growing season. They have very specific, a lot of them have very specific periods where they're active during the seasons. As an example, this mason bee here, they overwinter as adults. Once they reach the adult stage, the flying stage, they will just remain dormant during the winter. And as soon as spring starts coming up, they go out and start feeding, especially in flowers and trees and shrubs, and complete their cycle in this shorter period during spring and sometimes until early summer. So it's a good thing because these bees help pollinate these different spring flowers that are really dependent on them, and some crops as well. As an example, there's one species of these mason bees that are important pollinators of apples. And in terms of activities as well, bees and flower flies will have different periods of the day where they're more active, and not all species will be active the whole day. Flower flies and bumblebees, for example, they're pretty common, and usually they're more active in the early hours of the morning. Because of their own biology, they can have a head start during the day, while the other species will come up later in the mid-morning and late morning. So it's always important to remind of all these ecological services that these organisms are able to provide. So besides they guarantee that these plants are able to pollinate and reproduce themselves, produce fruits and seeds. And some of these plants actually need these specific pollinators to be able to reproduce. There are some flowers, for example, that only bumblebees are able to crack open just because of their strength and size, that other pollinators wouldn't be able to get in. Shape of flowers play an important role in selecting which pollinators will go after it. Tracy will show some examples and talk a little bit about that later on during her presentation. And so important, as I know it's a concern for lots, it's their impact on the pollination of our crop foods. As just a few examples, apples, cucumbers, mangoes, squashes, blueberries, watermelons are lots of examples that require insect pollination to be able to produce fruits in the end. A very common one that I hope some know, it's the hoary squash bee. And it's a very important one, although they are kind of a little bit of a generalist. They go to more flowers, but they do have a preference for squashes and field pumpkin flowers to go gather their pollen, and helping those plants carry on pollination. And it's important to talk about this bee because, and I will talk about nesting very shortly, but this is an example of a ground nester. So the nests of these bees are actually in the soil, and they're very negatively affected by pesticides that have a long permanence in the soil, because that will end up killing the bee and its young. We know that some crops can self-pollinate, but it is reported already that this can lead to problems as genetic deficiencies that are carried out by the self-pollination. And also there are studies that already report that pollination by insects will increase seed production and fruit size in crops. And wild bees, we know about the honeybee and its impact, and other commercially reared bees, but wild bees are still needed for lots of crops. Honeybees are not perfect for every single crop. Some plants, such as the blueberries and eggplants, they require buzz pollination to be able to carry out the formation of fruits and seeds. And buzz pollination is this practice that the bumblebees, it's an example of that. They just grab onto the parts that produce pollen on the flower, and they shake it really hard, and then that's the way that they get the pollen out, that other bees wouldn't be able to do that. And just giving another example of a wild bee pollinator would be leafcutter ants. There are a native pollinator from Canada, and they're a common one seen in those in crops like blueberry. Also, in greenhouse, native bees are used for augmenting and guaranteeing the pollination of plants inside greenhouse, as has been used with the another example here of the common eastern bumblebee. And some crops, greenhouse crops, where they're used is tomatoes, bell peppers, and strawberries, very important in those productions. Also, they're important for non-food crops such as clover and alfalfa that are known to be important pollinators for them are native wild pollinators. Such as the bees and the flower flies. Mm. So in terms of values, just to highlight in terms of monetary values, the importance of these pollinators, the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services released a report in 2016, which they valued the importance of pollination worldwide around $503 trillion dollars. They also highlighted other important numbers, such as the number of wild flowering plants that are actually pollinated by animals in general is around 87.5%. And 85% of the leading global crop types rely on animal pollination at some point to be able to be successful. So, and then we're talking, how do we maintain these pollinators? How can we guarantee that they're still present around and being able to visit crops and that they're present in the environment to keep on helping on these aspects? So we need to maintain pollinator habitat. And what is pollinator habitat? Tracy will talk this a little bit further in detail next. But just to cover some points here, so this pollinator habitat is just a place with conditions where these native pollinators can survive and thrive. As we humans need food and housing to be able to survive, so do these pollinators. Will have similar needs. Especially in farmlands, around farmlands, when crops are not flowering yet, the pollinators still need to eat to be able to live. So honeybees, as considered as more of a livestock organism, doesn't require specific habitats for them as these other native pollinators do. The honeybees can always return to their colony, be put aside or taken to another place. But these native pollinators don't have that easy. So just an example of a pollinator habitat would be a meadow. So is one of the options, provides the food for them and also shelter, which I will talk about in the next slide. And not only that, but other organisms, birds and mammals, will also take advantage of meadows as a place for them to live and feed. So yes, so not only for the pollen and nectar, and now talking about these nesting needs that these organisms have. Some bees are where do they make their nests? And one of these species will do them inside hollow stems of plants. They will go inside hollow twigs, and that's how they're gonna make their nests. As I mentioned before, remember, they bring the pollen, put the egg there, and then close the cell inside the nest. So hollow stems are perfect for these species. Other species will make their nests on the ground, as I talked about the hoary squash bee before, or some of them will actually make galleries or take advantage of galleries in dead wood and make their nests in there. So just to give an image of how these cells look like. This is from a leaf cutter bee. So you can see inside here how the process works. These are different stages of development. As the bee keeps making one cell after the other, you can see the different stages of development of the larvae, with older larvae here on this side, and then on this side it's the younger cells. And this is just to see a little bit how the shape of the cells looks once they're removed from where the nest is being built. So just a little video here to show how a ground nesting bee works. This is another leafcutter bee. Just in this case, they're carrying a little, carving a little gallery for themselves on the ground. But then the structure of the nest will be sometimes similar to the other one that I showed you. And some of other bees will make just different galleries where they're gonna put their young. An interesting fact as well, for the bumblebees, a lot of the queens, they don't dig a hole for overwintering, but they will use actually other animal burrows to take shelter during winter. And then from there they emerge and will carry on their life cycle in the next year. Now talking about flower flies, as I mentioned, they don't have the same, the larvae don't have the same habit as they're in the bees. They're more independent. Once the flower fly lays its eggs, the larvae will go on and live its life on its own until it reaches the adult stage. And I hope a lot of you can appreciate this. A lot of the species of flower flies, their larvae are actually predators of other insects, especially pests. Insects pests. So whiteflies, aphids, caterpillars, thrips, and bees don't do this, but flower flies, they have a lot of species that their larvae will actually go and eat lots of those. They can eat dozens, there are species that can eat dozens to hundreds of individual pest species during their whole lifetime until they become an adult, and that's just one larvae. But not only that, just to make it clear, this is very interesting and a fascinating part of flower flies, but they also have other habits as aquatic decomposers. They can live inside like wet mediums, especially with decomposing organic matter, and they will recycle that. They will eat the decomposing organic matter, the bacteria that are growing in there, and end up participating in the cleaning of these mediums. And also other species will grow in other sorts of decomposing organic matter like rotting wood and a lot of other specific habitats. We have other species that will grow in sap runs from hardwood trees. So very diversified habits inside the flower flies. Going back to the IPBES report, although the data is from Europe, this is where we start getting our concerns about why are we trying to conserve these pollinators and maintain them. There have been reports and studies indicating that 40% of the species of bees and butterflies were threatened, while more than 30% of them were already documented as declining. This is data for Europe, and we're gathering more data and in North America as we speak. The danger here that I would like to highlight, as I mentioned, if you remember the specialists, pollinators, those bugs are in even higher risk of disappearing because of their very specific diet. If that thing is cut off from the environment for them, they'll surely disappear soon. So this is just an example of like problems, and one of the ways that Canadian Wildlife Federation is trying is to still stick around. Like this example of a roadside that's completely mowed. Like not only there are no forbs for the pollinators, foreign plants for the pollinators to feed upon, but also all the possible places where the bees could nest and the flower flies larvae could live are gone. So if they have no place to live and eat, they can't, they won't be able to survive here. So there are several cases of other elements that are contributing for this pollinator decline, and climate change is one of them. Pesticide use is also a concern. Sometimes drift from applications going to other habitats and permanence in the soil. Diseases and parasitism is another issue, but loss of habitat takes a big toll on these organisms. So through habitat restoration and providing food sources, and also, as I mentioned, like for example, those that grow in hollow stems, leaving little stands of plants that that have hollow stems will help them thrive and survive there. I would like to, Trace will talk a little bit more about this, but milkweed is an important element in this whole story as well. Not only we have our key species, the monarch butterfly, that completely relies on on milkweeds, native milkweeds, because that's where their larvae feed upon. And if there's no milkweed for the larvae, they won't be able to grow up into an adult and carry on maintaining the populations of this beautiful butterfly. But not only that, milkweed will also provide food and resources for all other organisms, as you can see in this picture, not only the monarch butterfly. So here the iconic adult, and here's their larvae. But as you can see here, all sorts of bees, other butterflies, beetles, flies will also feed upon the milkweed. Sorry for taking so long, very passionate about the topic, but that's it, what I had to present about pollinators. I'll let for Tracy to talk a little bit more about pollinator habitat now. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Jim. It was very interesting. It makes us all passionate about all the pollinators. There is a question in the question box. So while Tracy gets her slides ready, maybe we'll put this to you. Hold on, we just lost it here. 1 sec. When do flowers and trees produce pollen and nectar? Is it weather dependent or time of day?
It's the season and time of day. A lot of them, there are flowers that only bloom at night. But sorry, it escapes me in Canada for this period which ones would do that. But it's usually during the day when these organisms are active. Things that bloom at night usually are pollinated by moths, but there are other organisms that go there as well. But is as soon as the flower is open, the pollen is there for the bugs to go for it.
Yeah, and I can
And-
add on to that. So some of the spring seasons that we might expect to see, like the cherries and the willows, they're available to like the flower flies that are up, one of the first species that are looking for food. And even our dandelions are a source of nutrition, as much as people hate them. Because they're usually one of the first things up. So
Right.
yeah, okay.
Perfect.
I'll jump ahead then, Kelly, if you're ready.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Great. So thank you for that lovely introduction there, Gilles. My name is Tracy Atwell. I'm a restoration ecologist with the Canadian Wildlife Federation. And Gilles and I overlap quite a bit. His obviously is the pollinator focus and mine is the plant and habitat focus. So we do a lot of work around pollinators and meadow habitat in a variety of different habitats. And it came from this concern over the pollinator decline that Gilles mentioned. So we talk about the pollinator bus, and we have all the different groups of animals underneath that provide services in our ecosystems. And most people don't even realize that these things are pollinators. So that's a very important thing to know. And yes, we have all these different kinds of pollinators, and some are specialists, some are generalists, and there's a variety of different flower types. We already talked a bit about what pollinators do for the environment, so I wanted to just highlight livestock. So those plants that need to be pollinated that livestock feed on. Also fiber, so cotton and flax are crops that we use for our clothing and other products that are important to be pollinated in the environment. And just the ecosystem benefits to all creatures. So for pollinators in a general sense, we need food, water, and shelter. So this is a graphic we often use for people who want to do a native garden. So lots of color, water, and nesting resources. So looking specifically at plants, we have all these different groups across the top, the pollinator groups, and each of them have sort of slightly different needs in terms of the color of the flower, whether a flower has a nectar guide, which I will show you a picture of, whether it has an odor, what kind of pollen it has, what is the shape of the flower. So these are all things that we might never consider when we think about the variety of flowers that are out there available to the pollinators. So if you can see these sort of faint purple stripy lines in the middle of this flower. So this is an example of a nectar guide, which I only learned about last year. And it was quite fascinating to know that the bees are looking for these little lines, and it helps guide them into where they can find that nectar. So if the flower doesn't have that, they might have a harder time of getting into the center of that flower. So only some flowers provide that nectar guide. And flower shapes, so you can see quite a bit of variety here on what the flower shapes look like. And as Jill alluded to, there's only going to be certain species that can get into those, like the gentian, purple in the lower middle. That's a very tight flower that's very hard to open. So you would need a bee to get into that. Food for all seasons. So this is just a little colorful chart to show you some examples of different species that we use in our meadows. And the color shows you the color of the flower. And then it shows you the range of the season that that flower is available. So if we look at the common milkweed, it's a pinkish color and it's available in July and August. And then we go to New England aster, which is a blue purple shade, and it's available September and October. So if you're a bee, you have to be able to find your food throughout those different seasons, and you're going to be looking for these different color patterns and different flower shapes. So that's quite important to know. So that's one of the focuses we have in our meadow mix, making sure that we have variety of color, variety of flower shapes, and species that cover that whole range of our growing season, especially in Ontario. And here's another example from the St. Lawrence lowlands. So a number of species that are found in the environment and the different species that they're available. So you see there's very little available in March and April. And then a smaller group of things that are available in September and October. So Gilles mentioned a bit about the monarchs. So this was also one of the impetuses for our program, looking at the losses of the monarch coming back to, leaving Mexico and coming back to Canada. Ontario and Quebec represents about 11% of the population. So our approach is to try to make sure that nectaring habitat on the milkweed is there. So that would be our part. And also the importance of the goldenrod and the asters is what they can fatten up on in the fall before they make that long trip back to Mexico. So milkweed for monarchs. So this is a chart of the milkweed species of Canada throughout all the provinces. And there's a variety of different species, 14 in fact, and some are found in some provinces and some are not. The common one, being the common milkweed, is found through most of the provinces, but very strongly in Ontario and Quebec, which is probably why we see that the population of milkweed, population of monarch is strongest in Ontario and Quebec. You can see there's a variety of flower shapes, colors. Some are really rare species that are hard to get seed for and hard to get growing. Some are extirpated and almost rare. And then milkweed species provides benefits for a number of other pollinator species that we never even think about. Carpenter bees, sweat bees, leafcutter bees. So there's a benefit across the whole environment when we make sure that the milkweed is present. So what do? We restore these meadow habitats full of flowers on places, particularly on farms where there's marginal lands, edges, even conservation areas. The idea is to diversify and put these meadows in as many places as possible, providing a landscape benefit so pollinators can move around and find what they need in these different places. So even if they're small, they can still travel and they can find these patches to fulfill their life cycle. So native meadows also provide ecological services, so flood attenuation, provide natural snow fences. They provide low maintenance, so they don't have to be mowed or sprayed, and obviously being a native habitat that they provide for pollinators and insects. So part of our project that's really important that we work with partners on is good site prep. So when we find these pieces of land, we discuss in great detail with our partners about how to get ready and prep the site. 80% of our efforts are in the site prep, getting it right from the start. And we design native seed mixes for these meadows that are very diverse, as I mentioned, with all the different flowers, small percentage of grasses, and allowing some open spaces in the ground and allowing for that stem nesting that you saw. So this is quite expensive and hard to find. So I think that's one of the benefits of our program is that we're able to source that and cover that cost for partners. And then in the lower left, you'll see hand broadcasting, which is one of the methods of getting the seed in the ground. Also, drill seeding is an option as well. And then the picture in the lower right, you'll see rolling. So that is also a very important step in the site prep to get that good soil to seed contact. Site maintenance, also very important in the first growing season. We expect to see some weedy things showing up. So the best practice is to do a high mow, 8 to 10 inches high to get rid of anything before it goes to seed. And we're going to spot spray anything problematic like thistles or well, parsnip or something like that. That's quite concerning. So one thing that is different between a crop that a farmer would grow versus native seed is the time frame, and also this thing called cold moist stratification. So native seeds need this time underground. And what's going to happen is over our winter, there's going to be cracking of the coat. Water is going to start to seep in there and slowly start to activate the cell and make sure that the seed knows it's time to grow. So putting seeds in the ground in the fall and winter is a great practice so that it gives you that spring forward. So you get into the spring, those seeds are ready to start to grow. Versus if you put the seed in the ground in the spring, then you're gonna have to wait a whole nother season to see a lot of these species show up and germinate. We also talk a lot about sleep, creep, and leap. So this is sort of a 3-year cycle. So in the first year, the stratification's happening. Second year, they're starting to put their energy into their roots. And year 3 is when the growth in the leap and growth is going to occur. So it is a discussion about expectations and the time frame. So it's not going to just all bloom right the first season. So that's important for our partners to know as well. And just emphasize that there's a bunch of other species that also share this habitat. So there's the birds. We've had some grassland birds show up in different spots. There's the dragonflies. There is the small mammals, even the reptiles and the snakes. You'll see the little bunny rabbit in there as well. So it provides benefits for all of the different creatures in that site. And with that, I just want to thank all of our sponsors and collaborators on this great project and thank Joe for his partnership on a lot of this work. And Kelly, I think we can take questions.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's terrific. If anybody has any questions, just pop them in the question box there. I had a question for Jill earlier, just the bees that lay their eggs in the tree stems. The picture that you had sort of different stages, but they do lay a lot of eggs in there. How do they all get out? Do they have to break open the stem, or do the older ones go first? How does that work?
They will pupate, so there will be this other like non-moving stage, and then until it's time to emerge, they will come out, cut out of their of this sessile state, this immobile stage, and then cut themselves out of the little cell and start flying about.
All right. Tracy, do you still have room in your program for more farmers?
Question, yes. We're looking for a few more partners who have approximately 1 acre of a site that they would like to do a trial with us on setting up a pollinator meadow. So you can reach out to me. I don't think I put my, I'll put my email in the chat box if anyone has questions or wants to talk about that more.
That would be great. And we have another question. How can we be assured or check that we are buying the right wildflower seeds for our region? Do you have guidelines for that?
So for our partners, we source the seed and we make sure that it's up to standards. For say a gardener or someone who just wants to plant at home, we do have a web page on our CWF site that has native producers across Canada. So, you know, you want to just ask them, are these native plants? And there's also lists of what are invasive plants in Canada that you can find. So you just would want to cross-check that you're not buying anything that's invasive.
Okay, that's great. Somebody is asking about what's involved in becoming a Canadian Wildlife Federation partner to create a wildflower meadow.
Yeah, so obviously we're looking for these farmers who have these pieces of land who maybe it's not profitable to grow anymore. Or say they just want to set aside a piece to promote meadows and promote their pollination of their crops. We just have a conversation, we do a plan, and we have someone to come out and seed it for them. So it's pretty straightforward. So yeah, if you have any more questions, you can email me.
Okay. And I see Joe put his email in there as well. So Lauren asked, I guess for myself to talk a little bit about the RALP program. The OSCIA, as many of you know, do have a lot of incentive programs to support pollinator habitats. The RALP program is one of them. I will put up our website address at the end of this, and you can join the OSCIA website to see all of the different programs that we have on offer at the moment and to join the mailing list as well. Brenda asked, do you recommend insect hotels?
Well, I was about to write on the chat there.
Okay.
It's a cool practice because then you can provide some nesting habitat for these that live in cavities. I have some concerns sometimes about the spreading of disease between organisms, because then you're using the hotel and they keep reutilizing. If there's some pathogen, some disease that's in there, might pass along to another species. So proper maintenance of these hotels needs to be followed to make sure that you're not promoting like spreading of disease, but still providing some habitat for these organisms using natural crevices and leaving like pieces of wood there. The plants, as we mentioned, that have hollow stems. Still some stacks of it, some bunches of twigs as well. Like these natural things, I think are better and with less negative effects for the organisms.
Okay. I see that Tracy put the native plant suppliers from the Canadian Wildlife Federation in the chat box. So if anybody is looking for that. There's another question. Is wildflower pollinator seed available through any agency?
Through any agency, I'm not sure what you mean by agency, but they're available through suppliers, so people who grow or source these plants. And some grow their own seeds, some collect from other people. You want them to be native species, you want them to be species that are grown in Ontario if at all possible. And grown without neonicotinoids is important as well. So hopefully that answers the question.
Thanks. Yeah. And Valerie asked, do you recommend dead hedges in general and could add hollow stems? What do you recommend? Like, are there any varieties of trees or bush that you might recommend?
I'll pass along to Tracy to remember other common plants with hollow stems.
Yeah, so things like elderberry or
Elderberry, Start to remember.
oh, what's the red berries that make a really sour drink? Rhamnus, not Rhamnus. The name is escaping me right now, but any of the ones that have tall stems, they're tall shrubs that you can cut them off and you'll see there's like a hole in the center of them. That's how you know it's something that your pollinators can use. So yeah, even if you can manage to leave them in your garden, but just take the tops off and that will provide that habitat for them.
Raspberry as well, right?
I don't think raspberry has a hole in the center of it. I could be wrong.
Okay, do we have any more questions from anybody? Just check there. There's some in the Q&A and some in the chat box. Okay, well, I don't see any more. So I would really like to thank Sheila and Tracy for holding this webinar today, and to the Canadian Wildlife Federation for all their work that they do with the Living Labs program. And thank you to everybody else who has joined here. I'm going to just share my screen again so that you can check out the Living Lab website. And we have the Ontario Soil and Crop logo website down there as well. Lauren also mentioned Joe Pideweed if somebody's still looking for some hollow branches. And thank you everybody for joining today. That was a great webinar. See you soon.